Welcome, everyone. We are so happy that you could join us this evening for Weird and Wonderful Trees with Tacoma Tree Foundation. This event is made possible through funding from the Tacoma Creates program. Tacoma Tree Foundation offers a variety of resources, events, and workshops that make our neighborhoods more green and build community. I encourage you to take a look at their webpage to find out about events. One that I'm interested in is the Forest Bathing Walk that will be held at McKinley Park this Saturday. You can register on their page. Please join me in welcoming Sarah Lowe, the founder of the Tacoma Tree Foundation, an urban ecologist, an ISA certified arborist, and a mindfulness teacher. Sarah has a master's degree in watershed science and management and a bachelor's degree in fisheries and wildlife conservation from the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Over the years, Sarah has monitored, planted, and managed urban trees and natural areas in Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, and Tacoma. Sarah now incorporates mindfulness practices to forest walks to encourage an appreciation for nature and an opportunity for stress reduction. Sarah is proud to represent the Tacoma Tree Foundation, which educates, empowers, and supports community members in neighborhood-based greening in order to grow greener, healthier, and a more connected Tacoma. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here. Really appreciate the Tacoma Public Library giving us this opportunity, and of course Tacoma Creates for funding it. I'm excited that we have folks on the webinar tonight, and happy to receive questions if you have any. And by the end, we'll have a little time for special requests if you have any of those. So really the focus today is kind of on the weird and wonderful, and really all trees are weird and wonderful. So if you look at any one close enough, I think you'll find something awe-inspiring about it. And this was made possible by Tacoma Public Library and Tacoma Creates. Quick about me, I'm Sarah Lowe. That's me with a praying mantis. I'm founder of Tacoma Tree Foundation and a lover of plants of all sizes. Tacoma Tree Foundation, as we just heard, it does educate and empower and support community members in neighborhood-based greening. And we do this to bring people together and also to grow a more healthier and greener Tacoma. I do want to take a minute to acknowledge, oopsie. I want to acknowledge that we are on the traditional homelands of the Puyallup tribe. The Puyallup people have lived on and stewarded these lands since time immemorial, and they continue to do so today. We recognize that the land we are standing on was stolen from the Puyallup people. We acknowledge their stewardship, their forced removal, and their continued fight to live on their ancestral lands. That said, we're not intending to speak for anyone, but to respectfully take a step towards supportive allyship and to take responsibility for our own parts in the caring of land, water, plants, and animals. Encourage you, if you want to learn more about land acknowledgements, the Puyallup tribe has a really great website on it. I put the link here, and maybe we can add that again later. Okay, so our plan for now is to talk about plant names a little bit. It's kind of necessary in order for us to be sort of all talking the same language, so to speak. Consider our own individual experiences with trees. And then we're going to take a little journey through some weird and wonderful trees. And I had a really hard time picking which trees to talk about. And I probably left out some of your favorite trees. I know I left out some of my favorite trees. So maybe we can talk about that at the end. But if not, if we don't have a chance to talk about the trees that you love, that you want to explore deeper, definitely encourage you to explore them a little deeper. And maybe through this conversation today, you'll get some ideas of how to get to know the plants near you better. And then we'll discover the awe in the unusual, if everything goes according to plan, and maybe even the extraordinary of the everyday. I'll give you a little homework, nothing too stressful, and open it up to questions. So a note on names. Plants have lots of names, trees have lots of names, and every tree has several names. Generally, there's an indigenous name, a name associated with the folks who have lived with that plant for time immemorial, maybe. And that can be, and if the plant has a big range, that might be many names there too. In the case of what I'm used to calling the Western red cedar, the Lachute seed call it, and I'm going to try to give you the recording right now. Payax. And you can see here that was provided by Chris Britton to the Pierce Conservation District, which has a bunch of Lachute seed recordings on their native plant sale. So that's something to check out too if you'd like to learn more about that. And I know that the Puyallup Tribe language program has also been doing a YouTube series on how to pronounce plant names in Lachute seed. So also we have vernacular and common names that we refer to trees as. Sometimes it's the same as the indigenous names and sometimes it's different. Western red cedar, giant arborvitae. This can always get a little confusing because sometimes many different plants will be called the same common name. Arborvitae is used a lot for more than one different kinds of species. And cedar is used for so many different kinds of plants. Some are very distantly related. And we have scientific names. Generally a genus and a species. They're italicized, Thuja plicata in this case with Western red cedar. And this does tell us some things about the plant. Tells us evolutionarily or biologically how it's related to other plants. And sometimes there are hints in the scientific name about characteristics of the tree. And then every tree falls into a family. Suprassaceae, and that's what Western red cedar is in. Sometimes what happens is because our technology advances and we can better understand how related different species are, scientific names will change, plants will be put in different families, and we'd kind of relearn all these things again. And then there are cultivars and varieties. Cultivars you can think of as something that has been modified to sort of be the same over and over again. In this case, it's called Pygmaea, and that's a dwarf version of the Thuja plicata, and you'll see it is sort of designated this way. And then with varieties like this one, it usually has a VAR dot after it and then the name of that variety. And generally those are varieties that are, those are plants that have been selected for a quality that kind of popped up naturally, and then people propagate them to maintain that quality. Okay, so we're going to move on from names, but I just wanted to kind of set that, so sometimes I'll sort of flip between different kinds of names and I try to offer a few different ones for things, but it's just something to keep in mind. Okay, so let's talk trees. I wanted to take a minute to actually invite you to think about a tree that has some sort of meaning to you. So let's just pause for a moment and imagine, you can even close your eyes, just imagine a tree that pops up into your head, and maybe it's a tree you're really familiar with, or maybe it's sort of an imaginary tree. It doesn't really, it can be any tree, just whatever pops up first. And what comes to mind when you think of this tree? Do you associate it with any sort of memories or a location, a geography, a moment in time, maybe a feeling, sort of a sensory experience, touch, or smell? And what are some of the qualities that you admire in this tree or notice about the tree? And thinking about this tree, does it sort of inspire any feelings or kind of memories? And I'll just give you a second to think about that. And if you'd like, you can feel free to put something in the chat, kind of describing the tree that came to mind, or maybe even just a word about the feeling that came to mind as you thought about it. And I love asking people this question because there are so many different answers. Everybody has a different answer. But I have noticed some themes, and this isn't research, it's just sort of my anecdotal observation. But people do tend to talk about trees that are close to their home, or that they have shared a memory with a family member or a friend near, or a tree that they kind of in touch with literally, like one that they hung out on, sat on, or climbed. And I'll just, speaking from my own experience, even having kind of met and paid attention to many trees, having like a personal relationship with a lot of trees, I still go back to this dogwood that was next to my home growing up. And I had such an intimate relationship with it. I remember the feel of the bark. I can remember the flowers. I remember a wren had a nest in it once. I used to sit underneath it, so I remember looking up, and it wasn't a very big space. It was kind of tucked between two buildings, and I could look up and sort of see the sky through the leaves just a little bit. And the tree wasn't even a particularly healthy tree. It had anthracnose, but it was beautiful. And I remember even seeing the ants crawling on the branches. And we can cultivate this practice of paying attention. It's really just, I like to think of it as like the art of noticing. And we can do this by intentionally kind of going up to a tree and looking at the shape of it. There's so much variety in the shapes of trees, and even seeing shapes of trees in relation to each other. So you might look down your street and see a bunch of different trees, and some are really upright, and some of them might be a bit rounder, or kind of have sort of irregular shapes where, you know, there's more tree on one side and less canopy on the other. You can also notice the color of the bark, which may even change at different times of day, the leaves, the buds, the flowers. And then you can even imagine, like, not even imagine, actually look at how the tree's leaves move, or the needles move in the wind. And you can use all these different sensory experiences. You can use your sense of touch too, and actually touch the bark. And I think sometimes we create some distance, you know, between ourselves and the others, the trees, the plants, other people, you know, things like that. And with trees, we can get up close and touch them, and touch the branches and the leaves, and notice how they are each different, each interesting and beautiful, in my opinion. So I wanted to dive into some specific trees. I don't know if anybody can guess what tree this picture is. If you're in Tacoma, you're lucky to be able to see this tree once in a while. It's a monkey puzzle tree, which I thought would be a good one to start with, because it is, you know, this titled Weird and Wonderful, and monkey puzzle trees are really weird and they are really wonderful. Like they're pretty fabulous. We can see the scientific name here, Araucaria araucana. It's sometimes also called Chilean pine, which doesn't really kind of fit it that well, except that it is from Chile. It's also called Pehuen, which is the indigenous, or is an indigenous name. So the monkey puzzle tree, or Pehuen, comes from Patagonia in Chile and Argentina. And despite the common name, which, as I mentioned before, common names can be kind of misleading, really, the native habitat does not include any monkeys. Probably has some puzzles, but no monkeys. And monkey puzzle tree evolved millions of years before monkeys, which is, I think, one of those other, like, whoa, that's pretty neat to think about, the fact that this tree was alive millions of years before monkeys. And I think it's important to note too, and I'm not going to get really deep into this tonight, but that the native habitat of monkey puzzle trees, or Pehuen, is endangered. Habitat destruction, deforestation, and things like that. So I wanted to highlight some things that are just really interesting and unusual about this plant. In the right-hand corner here, you can see the leaves, which have this radial arrangement, which as trees go, you do see this occasionally, but it's not very common. Most trees that you'll see on your average day will have either opposite or alternate branching or leaf structure arrangement, basically. The other thing about these leaves that look like needles or even like spikes, and if you touch them, they are difficult to touch. But the leaves will stay alive on the tree for 10 to 15 years, which is amazing. And they have been around since the dinosaurs, and they're also lava resistant, supposedly. I feel like I need more information on that, but almost can believe it, really. So moving on to other sort of ancient trees, I thought we could talk a little bit about the Dawn Redwood, which is a really beautiful special tree. And you can see some in Tacoma, and you can see them throughout. They're very widely distributed at this point as a landscape plant. Metasequoia glyptostroboides. They come from, well, it's kind of hard to say that they came from somewhere, but they're mostly found in central China, and in central China they're called Shuisa water fir. And they were found in, fossils were found in Pliocene strata. And so they've been reproducing for 100 million years. That's amazing. Like, I can't really even wrap my head around that. And I think I'll leave it to you, I guess, to decide how amazing you think that is. But to me, that seems pretty resilient. So they were also gone. They were here in North America, which is why I say it's kind of hard to say where they came from, because they were all over the world and they were in North America, but then they became extinct, I guess you could say, for 15 million years. And then they were brought back to North America, I think in the 1940s or so. So I did mention that I have kind of a personal relationship with one particular dogwood, a flowering dogwood that was outside my home. And I thought it was worth also talking about dogwoods from the perspective of a plant that has a huge amount of variety. There are 12 genera, 50 to 100 species. I found kind of different citations on that. So I know it's at least 50 species, probably more like 100, and then hundreds of cultivars. And it really shows too, there's so much variety in the size. There's bunchberry, which is a very tiny ground cover of a dogwood. And there are sort of what a lot of us think of as these kind of small understory, but really showy dogwoods like the Coosa dogwood or the flowering dogwood that I mentioned. And then our native one, the Pacific dogwood, which is the one in the middle here, for a dogwood is huge. And when I encountered dogwood, this Pacific dogwood for the first time, I thought, wow, everything, everything grows bigger here. And I wanted to highlight something else about dogwoods. It's just, it's almost kind of like a geeky botany thing, but you know, we think of these flowers as a pink is what we think of as the flowers, but that's actually a bract and essentially a leaf that has been evolutionarily changed to be colorful. And then in the middle of that is where we have the flower. And when I mentioned before that we can practice this art of noticing, if we think about observing flowers, for instance, observing flowers on trees and thinking about the fact that so many trees have flowers that we don't notice because they're really not showy. And some trees have things we think are flowers, but they're really just kind of inviting somebody else's attention to that flower. So we can take the time to actually go up. Like next time the dogwoods are blooming, I encourage you to go up and actually look for the true flower of the dogwood. Yeah. And then just wanted to highlight again the Pacific dogwood here, and wanted to sort of take a moment to notice the shape and the form. And this isn't a super great picture, but I wanted to point out, let me see if I can use this pointer. This shape we have here, like, makes this kind of gentle arch. And you can see that a lot in dogwoods. They have this beautiful natural habit of kind of floating out away from the bark, away from the stem. And so if we're thinking about pruning or caring for the tree, as much as we can really notice the form, the natural form of the tree, the more that we can maintain that form, even when we have to prune or, you know, take care of the tree in some other way. I'm just gonna check chat a little bit. Okay, oh, wonderful. Wonderful comments here. Okay, I wanted to move on a little bit to a cultivated plant, the fig, the common fig, Ficus coryca. And I think one of the things, maybe everybody's familiar with this, the fig, you know, fig Newtons, fig jam, used in so many baked goods. But the flower is actually on the inside of what we call the fruit. And that's a pretty interesting thing. When we just looked at the dogwood, and the dogwood had these leaves that it was trying to make its flower look even bigger. We can think about it that way, that flower even bigger by having these beautiful leaves that point to the flower. And then here, the plant has created this flower that's on the inside of what is called a syconium, or it's actually part of the stem, or develops from the stem, so it's like stem material. And then it creates this little flower inside, essentially. And in order for it to pollinate, that little hidden flower gets a little tiny wasp to go inside. That wasp, the female, or yeah, the wasp sort of breaks its wings to get into the fig. And then that's how the pollination happens. Now, because of cultivation and that sort of thing, the figs that we have in our yards may not actually need that wasp to have ripe fruit. But it's a fascinating evolutionary thing to think of a fruit being on the inside. And ever since I learned that, every time I open a fig, I think of it as like I'm opening up the flower. It's kind of neat. And it's a great opportunity to talk about really interesting botanical terms that you almost never get to use. And it is considered possibly one of the first domesticated crops. So I didn't want to not mention maples because they are so widespread, and because I mentioned a little bit about wanting to encourage people to also see the extraordinary in the everyday. And we often do see, these beautiful red leaves or orange yellow leaves on one of the many different kinds of maples that are found here and throughout the North America for sure. Over 130 species of Acer in the maple group. Their seeds are pretty distinct. Lots of people have the experience of throwing up the seeds and watching those samaras fly down as like little helicopters. So one of those many shared, is not entirely shared, but often somewhat shared experiences. But I thought, since there's so much discussion about maples, that I would just point to one thing, because we're not that far away from spring now. And we have quite a number of red maples in Tacoma. And one of the things you can do in the spring is watch for the buds to burst on the red maples. And what happens is, before any leaves come out, it's like before almost anything else has color other than the evergreen trees, you'll see just a hint of red on the tips of lots of red maples. And then every day it will just be a little bit more of a pop. And then one day there will be leaves there, and it won't even look that red anymore. It'll be, switching to green as the leaves come out of the bud. But for a few moments there, actually it's about a week or so, you'll start seeing that little red, and you can look around, you can see all this red, and it's just a really neat way of being able to identify a tree, even from a distance, and at a time when it's the very beginning of spring. It's actually, to me, one of the first markers of spring is when you see that red from that red maple. So I couldn't not talk about some of the giants, right? So giant redwood, the Sequoiadendron giganteum, is really one of those phenomenal trees that when you encounter, just, I think, requires awe. I haven't met anybody who's encountered a mature or an older giant redwood or giant sequoia and not had that experience of feeling almost like you're in a sacred space. And it is considered one of the tallest, if not the tallest tree in the world. At General Sherman, one of the tallest trees in the world, stands at a little over 274 feet tall. So that's how tall a giant sequoia or giant redwood can get to be. Okay, so I wanted to invite you, really, to find a tree near you. Not right this second. You could even write this down as a little note. And get as close as you can to that tree. Really notice the bark. Notice the height of the tree. Notice the shapes of the leaves. Notice how you feel when you're near the tree. And often what you can do really is to then start walking around the tree and take those same observations from different angles and kind of see how your experience changes as you move to different spots of the tree, around the tree. I also wanted to take a minute to tell you that you can invite more trees into your life. And by coming out to the next tree share that Tacoma Tree Foundation is doing on February 19th at the Home Ownership Center in Hilltop, there'll be all sorts of trees to take home and to plant. And one of the things that is pretty remarkable too is if you watch a tree growing from the time that it is very small to when it becomes much bigger, you have a very different experience with that tree. And one thing that I have noticed too is that even just in the first couple of years of a tree, it changes so much, not unlike like people, you know, it starts out, some of its characteristics are very different. The way, in this case, the way the needles are formed, even sometimes the form of the tree changes a bit as it gets to be more mature. And this watching and observing over time is something that can really build a relationship with trees and plants and really just the natural world. And another thing that you have the opportunity to notice is really what else is coming when you have trees nearby. I mentioned the dogwood that I grew up with, and my experience of watching the wren and the ants kind of cohabitating. And with many of these trees, there are hundreds sometimes of plants that, or not plant, well, sometimes plants, other species who depend on those plants. For instance, those giant sequoias, giant redwoods, they, or coastal redwoods, can support something like 140 different species of organisms, some of which never even come to the ground. I heard one story of a, I think it was a western hemlock that was growing from up high in a coastal redwood. And just, you know, amazing that there's an entire ecosystem that can be in the canopy even without ever reaching the ground. And that's something I really want to encourage people to and pay attention to and notice. I also wanted to say that there are so many plants that are interesting to talk about, and Tacoma Tree Foundation, as well as the Tacoma Public Library, have YouTube channels where you can really dive in deeper about very specific plants. In this case, there's a wonderful Gary Oakes presentation. There's one on Douglas fir, a wonderful one on Douglas fir, and a wonderful one on madrone. Any one of these plants can easily fill an entire presentation with a lot of rich content, and as you can see with any of those. And if you would like to revisit any of the information from today, you'll have that chance as well. And I also wanted to share a few resources that are that I used. And one of them, I just wanted to mention, the tree book by Michael Durr and Keith Warren is available at the public library, at Tacoma Public Library. And kind of wanted to mention that what a lucky it is that we have the resource of the Tacoma Public Library, and that you can learn about almost anything by going onto their website and looking up a subject like trees and see how many things come back that you can request. And I love the tree book. It's a really neat, lots of detail and content in there about landscape plants. But that said, there's nothing really, like even Michael Durr, I think, would say this too, is that, well, I don't know what he would say, but he does, all of his books have really been about his own observations of plants and those of others. And this way of observing trees is really how we get to know them personally, you know. So there's a lot of information that you can learn, but there's nothing that really replaces this feeling of actually going out and enjoying your time outside with a tree. And with that said, you can also come out on Saturday and enjoy a forest bathing walk experience and have that opportunity to practice noticing, to practice paying attention to what it feels like to be outside among trees, what it feels like or looks like to kind of be paying attention to the bark, to the branches, to how those trees relate to other plants. I also wanted to say thank you to the Tacoma Public Library for this opportunity. I also wanted to say, as far as the Tacoma Public Library, that during this last couple of years, the Tacoma Public Library has been an outstanding resource, has continued to be an outstanding resource. And I know in my family, we have become weekly visitors of the library. It has really helped us throughout this time. It's wonderful having these talks like this. I know there's all sorts of ones available from the library for all ages. So I wanted to say thank you for that. And then also wanted to provide some time for questions and answers, because there's a lot of opportunity for discussion around these fantastic trees. And I would like to see some of the things that people have been putting in the chat. I could see there was a lot of good feedback there.
Sarah, would it be okay if I read those questions to you?
That would be great.
So you mentioned the event this Saturday. Do you want to mention it one more time and let people know where they can register for that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's at McKinley Park Saturday. I think it's at 10 o'clock. You can find out more on the tacomatreefoundation.org website, and also Tacoma Tree Foundation Instagram and Facebook pages. It's on both of those spots. And there's a registration link on all three of those locations.
Perfect. The next question has two parts. Where did the praying mantis find you? And when did the Tacoma Tree Foundation start?
Well, the praying mantis, that was, we received a bunch of trees, or we purchased a bunch of trees to share with community members, mostly around helping people increase the amount of shade that they had on around their homes. As we know, shade reduces the heat in your homes, and thereby reduces your need for air conditioning and all sorts of things, really. So I was out near South Tacoma Way, near those trees, and the praying mantis just hopped on. And actually, this kind of brings me back to this idea that every time I've done one of these things where we brought in a whole bunch of plants in a place where there aren't a lot of plants, then we get all these beneficial insects and butterflies and birds come and join us, and it's a really wonderful thing to be able to witness how much things can change with just a few plants.
I believe the hummingbirds enjoy them too. On that one day where we had a lot of snow fairly recently, I was surprised at how many hummingbirds I saw around landscaping bushes and trees. I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah.
The next question is, it's a little bit longer. So when I was walking in McKinley Park by I-5, you could find several trees that obviously were planted, not native, from the park's early history. Is there any plant lists available for such parks? I found one tree at McKinley Park that has a fruit capsule that splits at the end into 4, and I've been unable to ID that plant. Do you know what that might be?
I mean, it sounds a little like a strawberry tree, maybe. That's my first guess, because it has kind of a little casing on the fruit that when it opens, it kind of pops open. So that might be something to look at. Strawberry tree, which is related to madrone, but is from Europe, I think, Eastern Europe. But no, I think great question, and wouldn't that be a really cool resource to have? Actually, I don't think there's anything for McKinley. Well, I should say that the Metro Parks has been working on creating an inventory for trees throughout the park system. I don't know how detailed it is for McKinley, but if you wanted that, Wright Park has a map that you can check out online and look at all the different trees that are in that park. though they also have little labels on them, so you can actually use Wright Park like an arboretum and kind of study the trees individually, whereas we don't have that at McKinley.
I would also suggest at getting in touch with the Northwest Room, with Tacoma Public Library's
Oh,
Northwest
yeah.
Room. It's possible that there are some historic records of what was planted that could be interesting.
Yeah, and actually, I'm just recalling too that I think there might be some at the University of Puget Sound as well in their archives.
I believe so. That could be a whole nother
I
presentation.
know.
Next question, would you please put in the chat what you mentioned about trees available at the Hilltop Neighborhood Center?
I think that I can't actually provide much more information about that, except that there will probably be a variety of trees. I would say in the case of that event, to stay tuned to Tacoma Tree Foundation's Instagram and Facebook page, and also to the website www.tacomatreefoundation.org. Generally, there's always a bunch of native plants, and then usually a few other things that we try to make available that might work for a variety of landscapes. It's definitely worth checking out if you can get there.
And will this recording be on the Tree Foundation website?
It will be, I think, on the YouTube channel.
And it'll be on Tacoma Public Library's YouTube channel as well. Does anybody else have any questions? Or did I get, oh, I see there is another one here. Those are good ideas. This is in response to the strawberry tree. Thanks, those are good ideas. Plant isn't strawberry tree, but that would have been a good idea for my fruit description. I'll figure it out sometime.
Yeah, you can. I think if you'd like to take some photographs sometime and send them along to info@tacomatreefoundation.org, and then they're welcome to send it to me, and I'll try to get an answer.
And we also have, what is your favorite tree? And I suspect your answer, this is like when somebody asks me what my favorite book is. It kind of just depends on the moment. It changes from time to time.
It does. I always have a different answer. But to be honest, I think the tree that has captured my heart, and I didn't really talk about it that much, is the Western red cedar, which I think is just an outstanding tree. I mean, it's like, it can be almost as big as a giant sequoia, 230 feet tall. Basically, when we have these forests of Western red cedars and Douglas fir, you know, it's kind of creating its own climate. It's fascinating, and all these different uses of the Western red cedar and sustainable uses of Western red cedar as well. I think is a great approach, I guess, for how we care and steward for land. But also, I think just the form of the needles is pretty neat, and actually plicata, I think, means braided, and you can see that in the needles. They really have a kind of braided look. But it does change all the time. I feel like there really is no tree that I don't admire in some way, and I think I do have a special fondness too for trees that have unusual adaptations, like the monkey puzzle tree. I think, I mean, it has those needle-like leaves all over the entire plant, and to be able to do that and then maintain that for millions of years is pretty remarkable. And then we have that next to like McMenamin's.
Yeah, which is, I'm assuming, over 100 years old.
I don't know exactly how old that is. I don't know, but we could probably figure it out with photographs.
Back to the Northwest Room again.
Yes.
Oh, over in the comments, I see someone asked, I've often wondered about the trees on the UPS campus. Would you consider leading a tour there?
Oh, wow, that would be really fun. Yeah, I would definitely be interested in that. And I did for a while know the head of landscaping there. they do a fantastic job taking care of the plants at University of Puget Sound. It's a really beautiful arboretum.
Are there any other questions? Oh, how do you, so I'm reading, let's see. Thank you. How do I get in touch with you?
Well, if it's about specific trees that you have questions about, I'd say the best way is to send an email to info@tacomatreefoundation.org, and they can direct it to me. Or you can also follow me on Instagram at S Colleen Low, S as in Sarah, Colleen COLLEEN LOW. And you can send me messages about trees and things there.
And oops, I did not spell that right.
Oh,
there's a typo in Tacoma Tree Foundation, but I think people will clearly see it. I put two
okay.
N's. Any other last minute questions? Well, I think that wraps it. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, I see there was a comment about another book on trees, and there are a lot of really wonderful tree books out there. The ones I mentioned were really just books that I reference for things like this to make sure that I refer to the right technical things like bracts instead of petals, that sort of thing. But and the books that I recommended aren't necessarily the most easy to digest kinds of books, whereas there are some books that are just really wonderful to read also. So definitely kind of going back to that idea of if you're interested in learning more about trees from others, so beyond your own experience of getting to know trees, then checking out what the Tacoma Public Library has would be a really great step.
And I believe we have a number of trees that are more photographic books of trees as well. So those are a nice experience as well. Well, thank you everyone for thank you, Sarah, first, and thank you everyone for attending tonight. We really appreciate you supporting us, the Tacoma Tree Foundation and Tacoma Creates. Keep an eye on both Tacoma Tree Foundation's website and the Tacoma Public Library website for more events that you will be able to participate in. And in the fairly near future, we will be able to start having in-person programming again, which I'm really looking forward to. So we can actually get together and go walk together or some other more interactive programs.